Reading to you from the Gospel of John, chapter 21. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, two other of his disciples. Simon Peter, he said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." And they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. And just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" And they answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, only about 100 yards off. And when they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went abroad and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have some breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Son of John." "Yes, Lord." "Son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." The second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wish. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you, take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. And after this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, sometimes I'm fascinated by odd stories. I'm going to give you one. I don't know exactly what does this have to do with the sermon today. It's super random. But the year 2012, a shepherd boy named Stephen had a vision from God. Or so that's what he was saying. A vision from God, that God would deliver the Holy Land back into the hands of Christians. And so there had already been 4 crusades before, and all of them had ended in miserable failure. But here comes along another young shepherd man. Stephen had a vision. It would be different this time. And the thing, what made it different was they were not going to be sending soldiers this time. They were going to be sending children. And they were going to be carrying crosses and banners and singing hymns and hymning. And claiming a vision from God, Stephen held the crowd spellbound. With sermons and songs and promises of victory, and thousands followed after Stephen. All these children, I don't know what in the world their parents thought, but ragged groups of children followed after Stephen, making their way up through Italy, annoying the folk, all the folk people along the way in every village and town, I'm sure, and then climbing up over the Alps and down into Marseille on the French coast. Arriving exhausted, hungry, no real plan, things began to fall apart. nobody really knows what happened. Surely some of the kids must have stayed and found jobs there locally. Some certainly tried to return home, did return home. Others, they continued the crusade. They got on the ships to Jerusalem, only to disappear or be taken into slavery. It was an overall misguided disaster that would later be called the Children's Crusade. And super random story, right? I mean, what does that have to do with us? I mean, well, who cares really? A leader captures the imaginations of all of the people, and many follow after him, but it all ends in failure. So what does that have to do with us and the media? Like that's not us, right? That's not. But hold on a minute, because all of a sudden we realize stories like this are not so far removed from who we are. Such a random story, but it exposes what we really think about ourselves and what we're looking for in leaders. We tell ourselves we're smarter, you're 21st century. We know better. We're more sophisticated, better educated, just better, just smarter. This time it's going to be different. We'll find ourselves a leader. It's going to be different this time. And we're going to follow this leader only time after time again to find ourselves. It's not really any different than any other time. It wasn't different. Another inspiring leader, yes, getting the crowds to follow only to have it all end in failure again. This morning we're in John chapter 21, beside the sea with Peter and John and Jesus. But and Jesus telling Peter 3 times, feed my sheep, tend my sheep. Jesus speaking as the good shepherd. You remember that story in John 10? Jesus is the good shepherd. He speaks of himself as the good shepherd. He's the one who goes after the sheep, takes care of the sheep, leads the sheep, Jesus. Today we're watching the good shepherd at work in John chapter 21. This is what the good shepherd does. This is what he looks like. Going after the lost, strayed sheep of the flock. So I'm going back up to John chapter 10 for just a bit, because Jesus is the shepherd of the sheep, and Peter's one of the sheep Jesus is chasing after. And he's contrasting himself in the story of John chapter 10. He's contrasting himself with the hired hands and thieves, He says, very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter into the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. Contrasting himself. He's not like that. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Jesus, the shepherd of the sheep, the true shepherd. He's the true. John wants us to see him as the true shepherd. He's not just one shepherd among a whole bunch of shepherds. He is the shepherd. He is the one true shepherd. So this shepherd idea, it's not a new idea. The Bible's full of it. Psalm 23. Who doesn't know Psalm 23? If you grew up in church, you know it. You've heard it. The idea of sheep, though, it's not a warm, sentimental image. Sheep, first of all, because sheep are business. It's all about business. And the basic interest of the shepherd in the Bible is to earn a living off the sheep. This is their livelihood. They're feeding their families. And so the shepherd knows everything, becomes an expert in sheep, knows everything there is to know about the business of shepherding, because it's so vitally important to him and viable to them. And it's only when the shepherd calls, and the shepherd is the one who makes the flock. He's the one who forms the flock. The shepherd calls to the sheep and leads the sheep from one pasture to the next pasture. And by doing that, they become not just individual sheep, they become a flock of sheep. So without the shepherd, there is no flock. Without the shepherd, you have just a bunch of stray sheep wandering around, oblivious sheep wandering around eating grass, sheep doing their own thing, sheep getting lost, sheep and becoming easy prey for wolves, sheep. The shepherd is the one who creates the flock with his voice. The shepherd walks in front of the flock, and the flock hear, and the flock listen. And you can hear in the background of this story, you can hear, "Hear, O Israel, the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. hear, listen, obey. You can hear that commandment in Deuteronomy. And it's the instruction of the sheep that leads, the shepherd that leads the flock. The shepherd leads the flock with his voice. And before Moses was a leader of Israel, he was a shepherd. Before David was a leader of Israel, he was a shepherd. So when Israel hears shepherd, they are thinking leader. Thinking of king. The voice of the shepherd creates the flock. The voice of the shepherd keeps the flock together, protects the flock, causes the flock to flourish. In Jeremiah and in Ezekiel, the leaders of the nation are not shepherding the sheep of Jeremiah. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says the Lord. In Ezekiel, man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, to the shepherds, thus says the Master, the Lord, woe, shepherds of Israel who are shepherding them. Will not the shepherds shepherd the flock? The flock you do not shepherd? Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord, because my sheep have become prey, and my sheep have become food for all the wild animals, and since there is no shepherd. And because my shepherds have not searched for my sheep, but the shepherds have fed themselves and have not fed my sheep. And I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out. Ezekiel. In Matthew, in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Luke, we find Jesus going throughout the cities, all the cities and villages of Galilee around the lake, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. You're hearing from them, you're hearing in these Gospels the story of Jesus, who is the faithful shepherd, who is searching for his sheep, seeking them out. Jesus, the faithful shepherd, shepherding the sheep. In Matthew chapter 9, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. But there was already a king. Israel already had a king, and yet Jesus sees the crowds as helpless sheep without a shepherd. In John, Jesus says, the one who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, that one's not the real shepherd. The crowd listening to Jesus, they're familiar, like we are, they're familiar with would-be kings. They recognize Herod, they recognize Rome, great men whose voices commanded and compelled attention. And Jesus says, a thief and a bandit. In contrast, he says of himself, the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. I am the good shepherd. And I know my own, and my own know me. Jesus is saying he is the true king. The Lord, as the Lord spoke through Isaiah, I myself will search my sheep for my sheep, and I will seek them out. And here comes Jesus. I am the one. He is the good shepherd. He's not climbing over the wall at night, not knocking down the gate. He doesn't need to slip in under the radar. He doesn't hide what he's up to, trying to disguise himself and his doing and spreading misinformation everywhere he goes. He doesn't need to lie and abuse or misuse or do any bull BS or anything. He comes doing what the king should have done. I myself will search for my sheep and I will seek them out. And we all know about people who want to be in charge. I mean, don't we have experience of that? People who want authority, who bear authority, but how often they don't. They want the authority, but they don't want the responsibility. You know people like that. We've experienced people like that. Maybe we've been like that. You've been failed by people like that. Maybe you were told as a child, you're just lazy. You're never going to be anything. This is all you ever want to be. Or maybe it's the boss who sabotages you, or blindsides you, belittles you. Or maybe it was the coach, or maybe it was the teacher, or maybe it was the pastor who failed you. Jesus is claiming the authority. He shows, he demonstrates he has the authority, and he takes the responsibility. All those voices, they don't get to say who you are. Those voices in your head that have played out over your lifetime, they don't get to say who you are. They don't get to say, they don't get to have the last word over you. Well, this is what my father always said about me. This is what my spouse shouts at me. This is what my boss, the company loves him. He's very productive. They love him, but But this is what he did to me. I hear those voices. You hear those voices in your head. They don't have ultimate authority over you, your life. They don't own you. You don't belong to them. And I want you to hear that. All that stuff that's in your head that you let those voices speak to you, and you hear it echo in your head, you let them take up space in your head, you let them own you. Perhaps most devastating of all is your own voice, the hardest voice of all. Don't let that voice have any more say over you. God doesn't just say, I'm against the bad shepherds. He also says, I'm responsible. I will take responsibility on your behalf. You've got some things that you've experienced in life as a child, as an adult, that were traumatic to you at the time. Or as an adult, you have wounds, you bear wounds. The Lord doesn't say, suck it up, keep it to yourself, deal with it. The Lord doesn't say those. The Lord, remember, Jesus comes in through the gate. He doesn't hide. He doesn't deny. He doesn't obfuscate. He's not the thief and the bandit. He doesn't pretend that some things didn't happen when they did. And he doesn't pretend that some things did happen when they didn't. He is the true shepherd of the sheep. In John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. It's one thing to say that, though, isn't it? To say that I'm the true shepherd, but this good shepherd, how do we know that you're good, Jesus? The good shepherd, we know because the good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep, not the hired hand. The hired hand sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. The wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because hired hands do not care for the sheep. They don't matter to him or her. But what we know, and that's what we know about kings, right? Kings do that. Kings are like that. Those in power, wielding authority. What we know about them? We know that left unchecked, the office of king will gather more power to itself. That leaders will take what's not theirs to take. Kings will be kings, and they will take, and they will take, and they will take. Oh, but maybe we just got the wrong king. You know, we need a different king. The Bible tells the story of Israel's kings. We know how David started out with such promise, with such hope. And we also know how he took the wife of Uriah and how he had Uriah murdered. And he took the wife of Uriah. That's not an affair. That's an abuse of power. We know how Solomon started out, with such promise and such wisdom. But then how he allowed idolatry to thrive within the site of the temple, and how he took the men and the women from their families, and how he raised taxes on Israel to such a height, such a burden. And we know how all that worked out and how they failed. And we know Jesus is the good shepherd. Why? Because he lays his life down for the sheep. I am a good shepherd. I know my own. I know my own. They know me. He gives his life. He is for us. And in Romans, Paul reminds us that God is for us. If God is for us, then who is against us? He who did not withhold his own son, but gave himself up for all of us, will he not with him also give us everything else? Romans. Jesus, the good shepherd, shepherding the sheep. This is where we find, and now we find Jesus, the shepherd, the good shepherd in John 21. He's doing the work of the good shepherd. But right now, it's happening around the charcoal fire. Now, all of us, I imagine most all of us have memories associated with certain places, or maybe perhaps a certain place, bad memory, a certain place, a certain day of the year, a particular sound, a smell, or a thing, these things that hits you, that smell hits you, and it calls to mind, immediately calls to mind something. We have bad memories associated with these things. A song that was playing the moment the phone call came with news. You can't not hear that. You can't not experience that again every time you hear that song. Memories, they take form. And those forms, long afterward, paint those painful memories before our eyes with fresh colors. The form of Peter's bad memory, surely it must have been his charcoal fire and the smoke of the fire. John 21. Right away we remember that terrible moment when, speaking of this charcoal fire, of just a few chapters earlier, there was another charcoal fire around where Peter was, when Jesus was standing before the high priest, and 3 times Peter was asked, and 3 times Peter denied even knowing Jesus. Jesus had been arrested late at night, John chapter 18. It's late at night. The night is all around. Evil forces of the night are having their way. That metaphor of the night is playing out in John. John uses that word to fill out our imaginations. Jesus being interrogated. Where is Peter? He's outside in the courtyard. And a woman asks, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" At the moment when the night is at its deepest, darkest, he says, "I am not." And there was a charcoal fire there because it was cold and they were tending around to keep him warm. In the night, there, when the night was at its greatest. The second time around, the charcoal fire had another confrontation, only this time the day is dawning. Like the sun is rising. John is using these metaphors again. A restoration is coming, though Simon can't see it, he doesn't know it. The Good Shepherd, searching for the sheep, seeking out the sheep. Simon, son of John, do you love me? It's a question that we all face, don't we? If we know our own hearts, we know that we have let Jesus down, that our hearts and minds have plenty of memories of our own charcoal fires of times when our actions or words we denied even knowing Jesus. Jesus comes and comes again and asks the same question. Simon Peter, son of John, do you love me? And you know that this has all the potential of going bad very quickly. I mean, you know, the memory of that night, of what he had done, was fraught with such great pain. And you can feel the deep shadows of that night suddenly returning. You can feel Peter's reliving the pain and the shame of that night. And the impulse is to fight back, or at least to flee and run. It's so strong. This moment, it must have felt like it was lasting forever. It's so fraught with pain. And it must, I can't imagine how it must have felt for him to say this. He says to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And everything hangs in that moment. Peter, he lives or dies right here. I think, you know, the way we grow up, the way we learn to expect things, I'm realizing Peter's expecting the worst, right? But then the most amazing thing happens. Jesus says to him instead of what he's expecting, he says, "Feed my lambs." And you know, he wasn't looking for that. He couldn't hope for that. He was expecting condemnation. Yeah, condemnation. Yeah, rebuke. Yes. He wasn't even able to start thinking about forgiveness. All those voices that he's in his head that he's heard before. "Oh, you're such a loser. You're so weak. A weak person. You failed me." Didn't see this coming from Jesus. There is no word of condemnation here. There is instead a word of commission. A word of commission. Feed my lambs. Jesus twice more asked, I imagine each one is just as painful as the first. Peter answers each time, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed my sheep, tend my sheep," Jesus says. This commission. Instantly, that charcoal fire that surely stood in Peter's mind forever, his betrayal is now forever going to be connected in his mind with his restoration. Instead of shame, joy. here, the shepherd of the sheep, the good shepherd at work, and the great power of resurrection on display. It just so happens that forgiveness and commission, they turn out to be the very same thing. Forgiveness, it doesn't just bring us back to a neutral position where we have to just start all over from scratch. Commission is never on the basis that we are good people. It's well qualified and well able, fully prepared. No, it's not that. That was Peter's problem before he. But now he begins from a different place with penitence, with repentance, with forgiveness, and commission, new commission. It's a gift of the risen Lord Jesus to Peter and to us too. With the resurrection comes new creation. The night diminishes as the dawn grows stronger. Resurrection is not just the end of it's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new one, which we get to be a part. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Yes, Lord, you know. Well then, says Jesus, tend my sheep. Tend my sheep. Follow after me. And I offer this to you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.